Hello and welcome to Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online. My name is Kelly and I'm a former wedding planner and blogger, and I'm obsessed with weddings. If you're planning a wedding in Ireland, you're in the right place. You're going to learn the tried and tested methods to planning your dream wedding without the added stress. Think of this as your one-stop shop for everything to do with planning your wedding in Ireland, with me, your new wedding planning bestie, and a cup of tea. This is Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online. Well, hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online. Today is episode 3 in a 3-part series all about wedding invitations. So we've covered things like what you should put on your wedding invitation and also what you should not put on there. We've also gone through things like the wedding etiquette. So we spoke about how to address the invitations, who gets an invitation. And then today we're going to talk about RSVPs. And I'm going to walk you through some really practical things that you can do to make it easy for your guests to RSVP so that you don't find yourself chasing after people to find out if they're coming, 2 weeks before your wedding day, when that's the last thing you should be thinking about. I also want you to listen all the way to the end so you can hear something really juicy about something that one of my friends experienced when she was given a wedding invitation, and she RSVP'd no because of something really inappropriate that was on the invitation, and I can't wait to share it with you because I was absolutely gobsmacked. So we'll get to that at the very end of the episode, but this is what we're going to do. I'm going to walk you through a few things that you can do, including the timing of when you send your invitations, when you request the RSVPs, how you gather the RSVPs in a way that makes it easy for both you and your guests. So let's get started with the first one. The first point is simply this: make it easy. And I'm saying make it easy for you and your guests. You want to make it as straightforward as possible so people know exactly how to RSVP, and you've got a couple of options available to you. If you are wanting to go in the digital direction, I always recommend having a free Gmail account, which you can use for all wedding related things. So if you were getting married, let's say you're getting married in 2024 and you want your Gmail account to be something like Glenn and Kelly 2024, if that's available, or Hartman Wedding 2024, something super simple. And you can use it for all wedding related things, when you're talking to your suppliers, when you're gathering quotes, all of that kind of thing. It just kind of puts all wedding admin in one space, and you're not going to have it all cluttered up with your work emails and your personal emails and like Amazon orders and all kinds of things. But one thing you can also do with that email account is you can use it to gather RSVPs. So you could put that email account on your invitations, or you could put that on your wedding website. Whatever it is, that account means that guests send an email to let you know if they're coming. Super simple, it's really easy to send an email, especially if it's an easy email address to type in. So I always recommend not having it be a long, complicated email address with words that are hard to spell. So make it simple. Having it all in one place is always a great thing that you can do, but going online isn't the right option for everybody. Some people like to do things with physical invitations and RSVPs, and if that is you, you also have a system available to you. You could do something like having an envelope with a card and guests can fill in if they're coming or not. The way to make that easy for your guests is if you provide them with the envelope and the stamp and your address already written on the envelope. So really all they need to do is fill in the information on the card about whether or not they're coming, pop it in the envelope, seal it, and send it. They don't need to worry about figuring out what your address is. You don't need to worry that maybe they've written it incorrectly and it gets mailed to the wrong person. They don't need to go and search for stamps. You're putting it all together for them so that they can really just reply and send. So those are two options, but the main point that we're trying to get across is that you want it to be easy and straightforward and not a convoluted RSVP system. The next thing is you want to be really direct. So it might seem obvious to you that you want guests to tell you they're coming in a very specific way. But if people haven't been to a lot of weddings, or if they're not familiar with wedding etiquette, they may completely miss the cues. So it's really helpful to tell guests. If you want them to RSVP in a specific way, tell them. If you want them to RSVP by a specific date, which I highly recommend, tell them. Make it really clear, really direct, so there's no way that people can misinterpret the instructions, And I'm guaranteeing you it's already going to give you so much more clarity, and guests will know exactly how to RSVP if you're really, really direct. It's also helpful to let guests know if somebody had to tap you on the shoulder in person and say, oh, I'm coming to your wedding. It's helpful for you to say, could you please formally RSVP, because we really need that as part of our wedding planning process. It's especially helpful if you're also asking for other pieces of information, like, if you're asking for dietary requirements, or if there are special needs and you want to make sure that you've got some accommodations for guests that might have special needs. It's really helpful if guests actually RSVP formally. So if somebody taps you on the shoulder, or if they drop you a text, and if those are not the ways that you've asked people to RSVP, it's helpful to say, oh, I'm so excited. Thanks so much for letting me know, but could you please RSVP formally? And that will do the trick. Okay, this is where it gets interesting. If you want to make it easy for yourself and your guests to RSVP, you need to time things perfectly. So this is what I recommend. Don't give guests too much time to respond, because they're likely to put the invitation aside and then forget. And in their mind, they know they're coming, but they just haven't said anything. But you also don't want to give them too little time where they can't plan accordingly and create space to be at your wedding day. So you really want to send your wedding invitations about 6 weeks before the day. And this is for your standard wedding that's happening in your hometown. It's also assuming that you've sent save the dates around the time that you got engaged and set the date and perhaps the venue. If you are getting married further away, let's say you're having a destination wedding, or more than 75% of your guests are coming from out of town, you want to give them more time. But the standard practice is about 6 weeks before the wedding day, you send out the wedding invitations. You then ask your guests to RSVP 3 weeks before the big day. So that gives them, if you're doing the maths, it gives them 3 weeks to receive the invitation, work out if they can come, and then submit their RSVP. 3 weeks is a great amount of time, because it's enough time for you to work out if you can be there. And assuming that you've already got a save the date, you probably already know if you can be there. You've probably already worked out that you can get childcare, you can afford the accommodation, and you've got the transport sorted and all of those things. But it's not so much time that you're going to receive an invitation, put it on the counter, and then forget about it. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a breakdown of how this could work. So 6 weeks before the day, send your invitations. 3 weeks before the day, RSVP date is the deadline. You want to give your final numbers to your caterer and venue usually 2 weeks before the wedding day. So you should check with them, because if your venue or caterer has a slightly different practice, you want to tweak your timeline a little bit. But what we're essentially giving is a 1 week buffer from the deadline that RSVPs come in and the day that you need your final head count. So that 1 week just means that if anyone has missed the deadline, they haven't actually missed the proper cutoff. And if you do need to follow up with anybody, which hopefully you won't, you've got a bit of a window that you can do that, and you're not sitting there saying, oh my gosh, I need to send an email today to tell the caterers how many people are coming and I don't know the answer. So you're giving yourself a window, and that will just alleviate a little bit of the stress from the situation. So I'm going to give you some date examples so that you can start to visualize what this looks like. Let's say you're getting married on the 3rd of May, 2024. I picked that date because it's around the time of my wedding anniversary. So 3rd of May is your wedding date. So that means that the date you need to give your final head count to your suppliers is the 19th of April. So that would mean that the RSVP date on your invitation would be a week before that final head count date. So we're saying the 12th of April. You may want to round that to the 10th of April, and I will explain more in the next point. But that would mean that you send your wedding invitations on the 22nd of March. Now, if you're listening to this thinking, how am I going to get my head around all of this? I have written these dates and these timelines in a blog post on weddingsonline.ie/blog. All of our podcast episodes come with a written episode breakdown. So you can have a little look at that. If you are a visual learner and you process your information by looking and reading at things, that will help you. So have a look. But the idea here, as a summary for this bit, is 6 weeks before the wedding, you send the invitation. 3 weeks before the day, you gather your RSVPs. And then 2 weeks before the day, you give those final numbers to your wedding suppliers. Okay, we spoke a little bit about the 12th of April or the 10th of April being your RSVP invitation date. Here's why I recommend you tweak things ever so slightly. Your RSVP date needs to be prominent, firstly. So when you give guests RSVP instructions, for example, fill in this card and pop it in the envelope, or send us an email or drop us a text, whatever that information is, you need to say before and you give the date, because then your guests know that there's a deadline. It helps to make it a little bit easier if the date is a round number, like the 5th, the 10th, the 15th, the 20th, the 25th, the 30th, that kind of thing. It helps to keep it memorable, and then they know there's a deadline. I need to get this in by the 10th of the month, and then they do it. We're almost at the spicy, juicy part of the podcast episode, but before we get there, one way that you can ensure that guests RSVP is if you keep the RSVP options fun. So you could say, can you attend our wedding? Yes or no. Or you can make it really fun and interactive. So your options could be things like, yes, I can attend, or no, I can't attend, or something like, heck yes, or see you on the dance floor, that kind of thing. Something that's in line with your personality, something that fits with the tone of your wedding. So if you are going for a really casual, relaxed kind of wedding, then, something like heck yes fits with that vibe, and it gives your guests a little bit of a kind of teaser and a taster of the tone of the wedding. Of course, if you're going for a more formal wedding, then you need to keep the language formal. It's something that we spoke about in one of the previous 2 episodes about matching the tone of the wedding with the tone of the invitation. But something else you could do is, while guests RSVP, you could ask them to submit their favorite songs that you can include in your playlist for the day. It just helps them to firstly communicate a piece of information with you, but it also means that you know that you're getting key information about their favorite songs. You can include it in the playlist. It creates that anticipation and excitement because they're thinking, oh, that means I'm going to get to dance to that song. It's going to be so much fun. But the idea here is that you create an interactive experience. You're keeping the RSVPs fun, and your guests are more likely to actually submit their RSVPs on time. Okay, bonus. This is the juicy bit. The bonus piece of information is, don't do this really awkward thing that happened to one of my friends. So we're talking about RSVPs, and the key is for guests to RSVP yes, surely. If you didn't want them to say yes, you probably wouldn't be inviting them. If you want guests to say yes, it's important to listen to wedding etiquette. And we spoke in great detail about that in last week's episode, but I didn't think to include this piece of information because it just felt like such an obvious thing to me, but apparently it's not. So let me set the tone. One of my friends was invited to a wedding, which was about a 4-hour drive away from where she lives. That in itself is not a deal breaker, because when you really love someone and you've got childcare and you have the resources to travel 4 hours, that's not a problem. So she was fully available and ready to do that. She was going to take time off work and everything. And then she looked a little bit down on the invitation, and they shared all the key information, and one of the pieces of information they shared under that key information is something along the lines of this. Your wedding dinner costs us X amount. I don't remember what it was. I think it was something like £150 or something like that. So let's say that's the figure. Your wedding dinner costs us about £150 to purchase. So please provide a wedding gift of equal or more value. And I was like, excuse me? So here's my piece of information for you. Don't demand gifts from your guests that are of a certain value, because it's tacky, it's a little bit gross, and people will definitely be a bit offended. So I know that there's a bit of a principle. It's kind of an unwritten understanding. I won't even call it an unwritten rule because it's not a rule, but it's an unwritten understanding that the value of the meal that you receive as a wedding guest should be roughly what you are prepared to spend on the wedding gifts. So that as a couple, what you spend on the wedding, you end up making that money back in gifts or financial contributions. But not everybody's in a position to do that. Some guests will be in a position to provide a wedding present that's even more expensive, and ultimately it kind of balances out. And at the end of the day, as a couple, you'll be receiving gifts or even cash gifts or honeymoon contributions that will roughly equate to what you're spending on the wedding. But you should definitely not be stating that as a fact and requesting those gifts on your wedding invitations. But another little tip before we finish is, if you do want to request that your guests have a look at your wedding registry, or if you would like a financial gift instead, it's completely acceptable to ask for that. But doing it on your website is usually the better space, not on your wedding invitation. Well, thank you for listening today. The Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online podcast is produced by me, Kelly, and mixed, mastered, and edited by Glenn Hartman. For more wedding planning tips, advice, checklists, and more, visit weddingsonline.ie.